Within a lot of hobbyist spaces, there are two types of people. There are ones who will collect hundreds of guitars, balisongs, or skates, and there are the types who will just use one single tool for thousands of hours and just think solely about building the skill behind it. There's overlap between both, and you can be into both sides of a hobby, but getting really deep into either side will give you a unique perspective on those tools. So somebody focused solely on the skill aspect will probably have stronger ideas on the parts of the product that actually affect your performance, but designing their perfect product would focus more on their own use case. But somebody with an encyclopedic knowledge of the market would be able to tell you the invisible ways that products differ from each other, the way they achieve their physical properties, what features really matter. They'd have an idea for what has and hasn't already been done in the space, and they'd know what would make a product truly stand out. And that brings us to Axilyn. His collection looks like this. He can tell you the difference between the Key 83 and the ATK 83. He's even tried every sleeve under the sun. That knowledge let him make these. The Aperion mousepads. 3 ultra premium mousepads that span from a balanced speed pad to one of the slowest control pads I've ever tried. But what makes them so special? Axilyn was kind enough to send pads to 4 raw input members to try and figure that out. All of us are pretty heavy into the skill aspect of FPSs and peripherals, more so than the collection, but between the 4 of us, we can cover a good number of use cases. We have Shinraiju, who's a fantastic Apex player, Lotheria, an amazing Overwatch tracker who plays a bit of Valorant too, Olivity, who mainly plays Deadlock with a bit of target switching, and me. I do play a good few games, but my perspective among this group is probably most useful as a collector. Here are the pads and peripherals that we've all used. Before we got them, I had a read through the advertising material, and it didn't fill me with that much hope. A lot of talk about the premiumness of the packaging, or slogans that don't really do anything for me, like an extension of your will or forever ascending, accompanied by descriptions that made it sound like the mousepad was some kind of blessed instrument that installed an aimbot in your arm. But I had faith in Axilyn. From the brief conversations we had, he really did know his stuff. Mousepads these days feel kind of stuck, with very few brands being able to put out something that makes them stand out from the top competitors. So I was curious to find out, in what ways can you actually innovate in this space? Running my hand across them for the first time was a bit surprising. While they did just feel like a pretty standard cloth pad, I would struggle to draw any direct comparisons to existing pads. The 2 faster pads are both smooth and textured at the same time, a bit like the Raiden, where it maintains a bit of that fine texture despite how smooth the surface feels under the skates. His innovation in terms of the unboxing experience is this. It comes in this rectangular box that lifts up when you open it, with all of the bonus items hidden underneath the pad, which are some skates, grips, and a keyboard mat. Despite my skepticism about the grand unboxing experience, this probably is the most interesting part of what they're offering, but we'll come back to that after we finish talking about the surfaces. The pad itself is rolled up. From my experiences with brands like Metrova or SteelSeries, rolling a pad in transit can have all sorts of long-term effects, like raised edges, warped surfaces, permanent wrinkles, stuff like that. But as soon as I put it on my desk, not only did it lay perfectly flat, but it felt flatter than a normal mousepad, which sounds like an insane thing to say because they're all pretty much flat. But the only thing I can compare it to are pads with silicone bases, like the Freefall. Because of that harder material in the base of the Freefall, it creates this feeling of firmness and consistency that's slightly different from normal firm pads, feeling more like a hard pad. But while this pad shared that feeling, it wasn't a hard pad, and didn't even have a silicone base. It was just a denser material. Because of that, all of these pads exhibit a strange mix of characteristics, where they feel like a mid or firm pad to the touch, but have the flexibility and comfort of a soft pad. It is subtle, but after reading up on Axilyn's base design, it did make sense. Another one of the areas that Axilyn focused on was the stitching. Some of the first pads to feature stitch edges were just horrible, the kind of thing that you'd feel all the time as you're playing as it digs into your arm. But these days, almost every pad in the market has stitching that's basically imperceptible because of how well aligned it is to the edge of the pad. To Axilyn, though, there was still room for improvement, and his goal was to make the stitching so precise that it can be below the surface of the pad. So, theory aside, how do these innovations fare in practice? Well, while my pad laid perfectly flat, that experience doesn't seem to be universal. I saw a few testimonies on Reddit saying it didn't lay flat for as long as 4 weeks, and even Olivity had that experience too. The stitching, while it is something you can notice after you're told about it, it's the kind of thing that you would almost never be able to independently observe because it doesn't really make any practical difference. It's better for sure, but not so impactful as to ever be a factor in my purchasing decision over stuff like artisan stitching. And for the texture, while they all do feel really nice in the arm, that's not really what you buy a mousepad for most of the time. So let's move on to the side of things that makes our perspective the most valuable. How do these perform for high-level aiming? We'll start with the fastest pad, since most of us are playing in tracking-heavy games. The Chrysolite. Axilyn doesn't really describe this as a speed pad, but a balanced pad on the faster side. When I think of balanced speed pads, I think of pads like the LGG Neptune Pro, the Tenta X Jinsoku, or the QCK Speed. When I think of normal balanced pads, I would think of pads like Artisan Zero, the Aqua Control 2, or the Cruisin Samurai. And this pad is slower than all of those. I don't think it's a bad kind of slow, but I think we are pushing it to the speed tier of things like the Spire Kamek or the Zowie GSR SZ, pads that are almost exclusively used in TAC FPS. Which again, isn't a bad thing at all. It's just important to know to set your expectations accurately. Like those two pads though, it offers a feeling of control whenever the mouse is in motion, without ever feeling super muddy. With that niche in mind, a balanced control pad, this pad performs pretty well. Of the 3 pads that Hyperion offers, this is the pad that all 4 of us landed on. Lotheria liked it the most of us. He wasn't expecting to enjoy a more control pad in Overwatch, but for him it was the perfect speed for stabilizing long-range tracking. It ended up in Shinny's rotation too, alongside the Key 83 and the Heian. And while Olivity and I enjoyed our time with it, maining it was kind of out of the question. We just have a really strong preference for fast pads, and while this one did execute on its niche pretty well, it's just in a completely different dimension to pads like the Raiden in terms of speed.
I'm pretty sure she was aimlock.
However, one thing that's been missing from this speed tier is a pad with strong sleeve compatibility, but it doesn't really have that. Shinny finds it good enough, but for the picker of us, the kinds that will say there's no sleeve that works in the Zero, because even the best ones have some XY variants, this pad is not quite good enough. I will say that all 3 of their pads are among the best in terms of arm feel though, so if you don't usually use sleeves, this probably won't be an issue. In terms of texture, Olivia described it as being between a Raiden and a Key 83, which I think is pretty fair. But I do think it leans much more towards the Raiden in terms of feel under your skates. Shinny went as far as to say that it's the main issue that this pad has, where sometimes it can be difficult to perceive really fine motions because of just how smooth it is. The Chrysolite is a strange mousepad when you consider its design philosophy. It's absolutely a good, high-quality mousepad, but in terms of aiming experience, it doesn't really carve out a niche for its own. It's just one of the best pads in its speed tier. But a month later, and Lotheria is still maining it over his Zero. And while the performance profile is nothing too special, him and Shinny both found that this pad outperforms Artisan in terms of durability, maintaining that like-new feeling of quickness for a lot longer. Even after 2 months of heavy use, it still feels almost just as consistent as it came out of the box, without any noticeable slow spots. As somebody living in a humid area too, he found it didn't actually affect his aiming experience as much as it normally does. For their other 2 pads, the balance pad is called the Quartz, and the control pad is called the Cordierite. After talking about their fastest pad being in company with the GSR SE, it makes you stop for a second and think, how can there possibly be 2 pads even slower than that? Thankfully, the Quartz is only a touch slower. It's still in that same sort of speed tier, though closer in company to pads like the Type 99. Shinny described the balance more like a slower Artisan Heian, and actually thought it was the most complete pad of the bunch. But for the rest of us, I played a bit of 2v2 with this pad. Like the Type 99, this pad offers a huge amount of help with stopping, and I had a surprising amount of confidence going for big flicks. But whenever I was in a scout duel, I struggled so much to keep up with the fast strafes and precision that kind of aim requires, because of this pad. Interestingly though, I don't think that this pad struggles with initial friction that much, which is what you would usually expect with an issue like that. I can see where Shinny's coming from with that Heen comparison, with that pad being famous for having quick initial friction but still offering quite a lot of stopping power. The Quartz though is so extreme on the dynamic friction that it's actually kind of jarring. This pad is anything but balanced. It seems to have one of the biggest gulfs between static and dynamic friction that I've ever felt. And that dynamic friction is so incredibly overbearing that the pad still ends up feeling muddy despite not really having sticky initial movements. Lotheria liked this pad even less than me. The friction was something that affected his aim so much that he compared it to playing with input lag. It was the only pad that he said he just couldn't play well with. But all that said, it's definitely an interesting pad. I think that old ideal of the lowest possible static friction with the highest possible dynamics starts to show its flaws in practice with a pad like this, though it did become one of Shinny's favorite pads. For the rest of us, I think we prefer the flexibility of a faster, more balanced pad, a bit too much to main this one. And that brings us to the slowest of the bunch, the Omega Mud Pad. Shinny didn't end up using this one. Olivia and I found it completely unusable for our use cases, but Lotheria does play a bit of Valorant. But from the way he worded his thoughts, it sounded a bit more like it was the only place where it worked at all, rather than being his preference on those games. Words like playable showed up in his review, and with this being one of the slowest pads I've ever tried, I can see why. If you want that kind of experience, again, it maintains the same quality and feels great on the arm, but I just don't think we're the target audience for this at all. And that's about it for our experience with trying to aim at these pads. I can't say that I'm floored by any of them, but the Chrysolite landing a spot in the rotation of two of our members does speak to its quality. However, I do think there is one strong use case for this lineup. These pads are $50, which is even more expensive than Artisan in some cases. But the mousepad isn't the only thing that's premium in the box. You also get 3 other accessories, those grips, skates, and the keyboard mat. For companies like G-Wolves, a lot of the time, these kinds of bonus accessories can just find themselves in a drawer, since a lot of aftermarket options are still a lot better. But like I said, Axilyn is an enthusiast himself. He knows what's worth using, and everything in this package is comparable to the best that enthusiast options can offer. That is the use case. If you have never dipped your toes into enthusiast skates, grips, or mouse pads, they can completely change the way aiming feels. And with the Chrysolite being a pretty solid all-rounder pad that most people would be happy manning in any game, for $50 you can get essentially an aimer starter pack that will last you quite a while. I think it's a pretty great bundle for the price. The 4 of us had somewhat mixed opinions on the pads, but all of us said the accessories were among the best we'd ever used. So for the specifics, the skates are made of POM, a material that really only Artisan has done well before. The Artisan skates were incredibly special. They eliminated the stickiness of initial movements so well, but stopping still felt pretty easy. Immediately after opening these skates, I noticed they were visually identical to another POM skate called the TBTL Palms. Those skates were okay. Still miles better than stock, but a bit sluggish compared to Artisan. But when I used them side by side, they felt completely different. They were pretty much just as good as the Artisan skates. And for Olivia, she felt like the Artisan skates weren't even as good as something like the Ultra Guide Silences, but these were her favorite skates on cloth. Personally, I felt like they were pretty much on par with the Artisan skates in terms of speed, and it's honestly a shame that he doesn't sell these separately, because I think most people would agree they're either an A or S tier skate. As for the grips, I've always found the idea of transparent grips quite cool. They're actually in the thumbnail of this video. And I love how it doesn't affect the aesthetics of the mouse at all. But how good are they compared to the best? Well, I polled the 3 other Rin members who got them, and they all said that they were the best grips they had ever used. To me, these felt identical to the Crescent transparent grips I tried, which is a good thing. They are fantastically thin, even thinner than the ones I main. With sweat and oils, they don't last quite as long as the Cicada wings in my opinion, but I think they're the second best grips I've ever tried. The keyboard mat is pretty self-explanatory. It can change the sound of typing and make it feel more cushioned, but it's mostly just a nice little bonus. I've used it alongside the Azeron for about 60 hours as an armrest cushion of sorts, and it's been really effective at that actually. Usually I have a bit of elbow pain by the end of sessions, but that's never happened with this thing. It's also kind of cool as a way to prevent your skin from touching the table under the pad, or using it as like a mini mouse pad. Honestly, it might be the fastest pad of the bunch. But yeah, here's a sound test. I think that's everything we wanted to cover. Thanks to Axilyn for sending these out. Thank you to the Raw Input members for helping me test them, and thanks for watching.